A violent storm raged over the small village, its winds howling like the tormented cries of lost souls. The night was a pitch-black abyss, broken only by jagged flashes of lightning that briefly illuminated the desolate landscape. Inside a humble cottage, young Amelia sat huddled in a corner, her tiny frame trembling not from the cold, but from the deep sorrow that gripped her heart. Just a week ago, her father, the only person who had ever shown her warmth and kindness, had been taken from her by a sudden illness. Now, at just 8 years old, Amelia was left alone with a mother whose heart seemed made of stone. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest within Amelia's soul. She could hear her mother's harsh voice in the next room, speaking with a man whose deep, unfamiliar tones sent a shiver down her spine. Amelia didn't need to understand their words to know that something was terribly wrong. Her mother had never been one to show affection, but in the days since her father's death, the coldness in her mother's eyes had turned to something far more sinister: resentment, perhaps even hatred. It was as though Amelia's very presence was an unbearable burden to her. The sound of the front door slamming shut made Amelia jump. The man was gone, but the sense of dread lingered, thick as the storm clouds overhead. Her mother entered the room, her expression hard and unfeeling. Without a word, she handed Amelia a small bundle of clothes, barely more than rags, and told her to pack. Confused and scared, Amelia did as she was told, her tiny hands fumbling with the fabric as tears blurred her vision. She wanted to ask where they were going, why she had to leave, but the look in her mother's eyes silenced her. As the storm raged on, Amelia was led out of the only home she had ever known. The rain lashed against her face, mixing with her tears as she followed her mother through the muddy streets. The village seemed abandoned, the windows of the houses dark and unwelcoming. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as they approached a large, shadowy figure standing by a carriage. The man from earlier loomed over her, his face obscured by the brim of a wide hat, but his presence alone was enough to fill her with terror. Her mother's voice cut through the storm, sharp and emotionless. "This is Mr. Alden. You're going with him now." The words were like a knife to Amelia's heart. She turned to her mother, her eyes wide with fear and desperation, but all she saw was a cold, unyielding gaze. There was no love left in her mother's eyes, only a cruel indifference. The realization hit Amelia with the force of a lightning strike. She was being sold, discarded like a piece of unwanted furniture. Mr. Alden's hand, heavy and rough, closed around Amelia's shoulder, pulling her toward the carriage. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt like lead, and the storm drowned out any sound she might have made. As she was lifted into the carriage, she cast one last, desperate glance back at her mother, hoping against hope for some sign of affection, some indication that this was all a terrible mistake. But there was nothing. Her mother's back was already turned, her silhouette fading into the rain-soaked darkness. The carriage door slammed shut, sealing Amelia's fate. She was alone now, truly alone, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the memories of a happier time. The carriage lurched forward, and Amelia felt the final thread connecting her to her past life snap. As the wheels clattered over the cobblestones, the storm seemed to grow louder, as if the heavens themselves were mourning her loss. Amelia pressed her face against the cold glass of the carriage window, watching as her village, her home, disappeared into the night. The journey was long and harrowing, the storm showing no signs of abating. Amelia's mind raced with questions, each more terrifying than the last. Who was this man? Why had her mother done this? What was to become of her? But there were no answers, only the relentless pounding of rain against the carriage and the occasional jolt as the wheels hit a deep rut in the road. The darkness outside was impenetrable, and the only light came from the brief, sporadic flashes of lightning that revealed twisted trees and desolate fields. As the hours dragged on, Amelia's exhaustion began to overtake her fear. Her eyelids grew heavy, and despite the terror that gripped her heart, she found herself drifting into an uneasy sleep. But even in her dreams, there was no escape from the nightmare that had become her reality. Visions of her father, his kind eyes filled with sorrow, haunted her, and every time she reached out to him, he faded away, leaving her more alone than ever. When she awoke, the storm had subsided, but the chill in her heart remained. The first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon when the carriage finally came to a stop. Amelia, groggy and disoriented, peered out the window and gasped. Before her stood a massive mansion, its dark stone walls looming ominously against the pale morning sky. It was a place that seemed to belong more to a nightmare than the real world, with twisted, barren trees surrounding it like the gnarled fingers of a giant. Amelia's heart sank further as the carriage door opened, and Mr. Alden's shadowy figure appeared once more. "Welcome to your new home," he said, his voice as cold as the wind that whipped through the open doorway. There was no warmth, no comfort in his words, only a chilling finality. Amelia stepped out of the carriage, her small feet sinking into the wet, muddy ground. She looked up at the mansion, its windows dark and lifeless, and felt a wave of despair wash over her. This was to be her life now, far from the familiar sights and sounds of her village, far from anyone who might care for her. As Mr. Alden led her toward the mansion's massive doors, Amelia cast one last glance at the horizon, hoping to see a glimpse of the village she had left behind. But the storm had left everything in a haze, and there was nothing to see but the cold, gray light of dawn. With a heavy heart, she followed Mr. Alden inside, the doors closing behind her with a deafening thud that echoed through the empty halls. And so, Amelia's new life began, shrouded in the same darkness that had claimed the night before. Amelia stepped into the mansion, immediately struck by the coldness that seemed to permeate every corner of the grand foyer. The high ceilings and marble floors amplified the sound of her small footsteps, making her feel even smaller in this vast, unfamiliar space. Despite the ornate chandeliers and lavish decor, there was an unmistakable sense of neglect. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow her every move. Amelia's heart pounded as she followed Mr. Alden, her mind racing with questions she dared not ask. Mr. Alden led her down a long corridor, the air thick with the scent of old wood and faint decay. The mansion felt like a labyrinth, with each turn revealing more darkened hallways and closed doors. At last, they stopped before a small room at the far end of the corridor. It was modest, with a single bed, a wooden dresser, and a small window that looked out onto the mist-covered grounds. The walls were bare, save for a simple mirror above the dresser. Amelia set down her bundle of clothes, feeling the weight of her new reality. Surprisingly, Mr. Alden's voice was soft as he introduced her to the room. "This will be your space," he said, his tone lacking the harshness she had feared. He told her she could arrange it as she liked, then left her alone to settle in. As the door closed behind him, Amelia felt a flicker of curiosity. There was a deep sadness in his eyes, one that resonated with her own grief. She stood by the small window, staring out at the overgrown gardens, wondering what secrets this place held. Days passed, and Amelia began to explore the mansion. It was both fascinating and terrifying, with its endless rooms and hidden corners. Mr. Alden was a man of few words, spending most of his time in his study, surrounded by old books and papers. He left Amelia to her own devices, though she often caught glimpses of him wandering the halls. Despite his distant nature, he was never unkind to her, and for that, she was grateful. However, his behavior puzzled her, especially when he called her Clara by mistake. The mansion was steeped in melancholy, its grandeur overshadowed by a palpable sadness. The servants moved silently through the halls, their faces expressionless, their words few. Amelia felt the weight of the past pressing down on her, as if the very walls were whispering stories of loss and grief. Yet, she found solace in the routines of her new life. Mr. Alden ensured she was provided for, giving her new clothes and encouraging her to spend time outdoors when the weather permitted. The gardens, though overgrown, offered a sense of peace. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Amelia found herself standing before a locked door. It was an ordinary door, unremarkable, yet something about it drew her in. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold wood, and felt a sudden rush of emotion. Fear, curiosity, and an inexplicable sadness. Before she could dwell on it further, she heard Mr. Alden calling her to dinner. The moment passed, but the door remained in her thoughts, a mystery yet to be solved. Amelia's life at the mansion settled into a quiet routine. She spent her days exploring the grounds, reading, and helping the servants with their chores. Mr. Alden remained a distant figure, always courteous but never warm. Despite the distance, Amelia felt a growing connection between them, fragile and unspoken. But the mansion took on a different character at night, its shadows deepening, its silence becoming almost oppressive. Strange noises echoed through the halls, and Amelia often lay awake, listening to the sounds of the night. One particularly restless night, Amelia decided to explore the mansion under the cover of darkness. Armed with a candle, she crept through the silent halls, her breath catching at every unexpected sound. The mansion felt more alive at night, as if it were watching her, waiting for her to uncover its secrets. She passed by the locked door again, feeling that same inexplicable pull, stronger now. But before she could investigate further, she heard a faint sound coming from down the hall. Curiosity piqued, Amelia followed the sound, her footsteps light and cautious. The voices grew louder as she approached a door slightly ajar. Peeking through the crack, she saw Mr. Alden sitting at his desk, his head bowed as he spoke in a voice filled with sorrow. But he was alone, speaking to an empty chair as if having a conversation with a ghost. The sight sent a chill down Amelia's spine, and she quickly retreated, her mind racing with questions. What could drive a man to speak to the air? From that night on, Amelia became even more determined to uncover the truth about Mr. Alden and the mansion. She felt the presence of another child, as if Clara's spirit lingered, watching her. The lines between reality and the past began to blur, and Amelia couldn't tell if the mansion was playing tricks on her or if something supernatural was at play. But amidst the uncertainty, one thing became clear. Amelia's arrival at the mansion was not by chance. She was connected to this place, to Mr. Alden, in ways she couldn't yet understand. The bond between them, though fragile, grew stronger with each passing day. Amelia knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The mansion, once a place of fear, began to feel like something more. A place where both she and Mr. Alden might find the answers they sought. The coldness of the mansion remained, but within its walls, a warmth began to grow, fueled by the shared sorrow and unspoken connection between a lonely man and a lost child. One night, as Amelia wandered the mansion, she stumbled upon a hidden passage behind a dusty, forgotten painting. The portrait depicted a woman with kind eyes, but it was the small latch behind the frame that caught Amelia's attention. With trembling hands, she pulled the latch, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside, she found a bundle of old letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. The letters, fragile with age, were addressed to someone named Clara, a name that stirred something deep within Amelia's heart. Curiosity got the better of her, and Amelia carefully unfolded the first letter. The words were written in a delicate, flowing script, filled with warmth and affection. It was clear that Clara had been deeply loved, and as Amelia read on, she felt a connection to this mysterious figure. Each letter painted a picture of a life filled with hope and joy, but as she progressed through the stack, the tone of the letters began to shift. The once joyful words grew tinged with sadness, and Amelia's heart ached for the unknown writer. The final letter in the bundle was different from the rest. The writing was hurried, the words frantic and desperate. It spoke of an immense pain and ended abruptly, as if the writer had been unable to finish. Amelia's hands shook as she held the letter, her mind racing with questions. Who was Clara? And why had her life, once so full of promise, taken such a tragic turn? The unanswered questions gnawed at Amelia, and she knew she had to learn more about this mysterious girl and her connection to Mr. Alden. Amelia became consumed by the letters, reading them over and over, trying to piece together the story they told. The mansion, once a place of fear, became a labyrinth of secrets waiting to be uncovered. She began to explore its forgotten corners, searching for any clue that might shed light on Clara's fate. The more she learned, the more she felt that Clara's story was somehow tied to her own. There was a strange sense of familiarity, as if she had known this girl, this Clara, in another life. As the days passed, Amelia noticed changes in Mr. Alden's behavior. He seemed more withdrawn, his eyes haunted by a sorrow that mirrored the emotions expressed in the letters. Amelia watched him closely, wondering if he, too, was reliving memories of the past. She longed to ask him about Clara, to understand the connection between them, but fear held her back. What if her questions brought more pain? What if the truth was something she wasn't ready to hear? The letters became a constant presence in Amelia's thoughts, filling her dreams with images of a life she had never known. In her dreams, she saw Clara as a child, running through the mansion's halls, her laughter echoing through the empty rooms. But the dreams always ended the same way, with Clara's laughter turning to cries, and the once bright halls of the mansion plunging into darkness. Amelia would wake up, her heart pounding, her mind filled with the same unanswered questions. Unable to shake the feeling that the letters held the key to understanding her own situation, Amelia decided to confront Mr. Alden. One evening, as they sat in the dimly lit dining room, she gathered her courage and spoke. "Who was Clara?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mr. Alden froze, his fork halfway to his mouth, and for a long moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire in the hearth. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with grief. "Clara was my daughter," he said, his eyes distant and filled with pain. Mr. Alden's revelation opened a floodgate of emotions in Amelia. She felt a deep sorrow for this man who had lost so much, but also a sense of kinship. Clara had been his daughter, and from the way he spoke of her, it was clear that she had been the light of his life. The letters made sense now. They were written by a father to his beloved child, a father who had been shattered by her loss. Amelia felt a tear slip down her cheek as she listened to Mr. Alden's voice, thick with emotion. As Mr. Alden spoke, Amelia realized that the loss of Clara had left a wound in his heart that had never healed. The mansion, with all its grandeur, was nothing more than a tomb, a place where Mr. Alden had buried his grief along with his daughter. Amelia's heart ached for him, but she also felt a growing resolve. She couldn't change the past, but perhaps she could help heal the wounds it had left. She was here now, in this place filled with sorrow, and maybe, just maybe, she could bring a little light back into Mr. Alden's life. The connection between Amelia and Mr. Alden deepened after that night. They began to spend more time together, talking not just about Clara, but about Amelia's own past, her fears, and her dreams. Mr. Alden, who had once been a distant figure, became more like a father to her, and Amelia found comfort in their growing bond. But the letters remained in the back of her mind, a reminder of the darkness that still lingered in the mansion. Amelia knew that their story was far from over, and that the secrets of the past still had a hold on both of them. Amelia continued to explore the mansion, hoping to uncover more clues about Clara's life and death. The more she learned, the more she understood the depth of Mr. Alden's grief. Clara had been everything to him, and losing her had nearly destroyed him. But there was something else, something unsaid, that hung between them. Amelia could feel it in the way Mr. Alden sometimes looked at her, as if he were seeing not her, but someone else. She wondered if he was afraid that history might repeat itself. The letters had opened a door to the past, one that could not be closed. Amelia knew that if she was to find peace in this place, she had to confront the shadows that still haunted it. But the more she delved into Clara's story, the more she realized that it was not just Mr. Alden's pain she had to face, it was her own. The mansion, with its dark corners and hidden secrets, had become a mirror reflecting her own fears and insecurities. And as the days turned to weeks, Amelia began to see that the journey to understanding Clara's fate was also a journey to understanding herself. Amelia's discovery of the letters haunted her, the words echoing in her mind long after she had tucked them away in her small room. The mansion, once merely a strange and cold place, now felt alive with the memories of those who had lived and loved within its walls. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of the wind through the old, cracked windows, seemed to carry the voices of the past. Amelia began to notice details she had overlooked before. A faded toy left behind in a dusty corner, a worn book with a child's name inscribed on the inside cover. Mr. Alden, too, seemed changed by the unearthing of the letters. He moved through the mansion with a heavier step, his shoulders bowed as if under the weight of an invisible burden. There was a deep sadness in his eyes, a sadness that mirrored the loneliness in Amelia's heart. She longed to comfort him, to ease the pain that he clearly carried with him every day, but she didn't know how. Instead, she watched him from a distance, her heart aching with a sorrow that she could not fully understand. The connection between them, however, grew stronger. In their quiet conversations, Amelia began to see a different side of Mr. Alden, one that was gentle, kind, and deeply wounded. He spoke to her not just as a guardian, but as a friend, sharing with her memories of Clara, his lost daughter. Amelia listened with rapt attention, imagining the little girl who had once run through these halls, her laughter filling the air with life and joy. But those days were long gone, replaced by a silence that was almost palpable. As Amelia listened to Mr. Alden's stories, she couldn't help but see reflections of her own life in his words. Like Clara, she had lost a parent, and like Mr. Alden, she carried a heavy burden of grief. The mansion, with its shadowed rooms and hidden secrets, became a symbol of the pain they both carried. Yet, amidst the sorrow, Amelia found herself drawing closer to Mr. Alden. He was no longer just the man who had bought her. He was someone who understood her pain in a way no one else ever had. Their bond deepened with each passing day, but so did the sense of unease that lingered in the mansion. Amelia often found herself wandering its halls late at night, unable to sleep, drawn by the whispers of the past. The more she explored, the more she felt Clara's presence, as if the little girl's spirit still roamed the corridors, searching for something she had lost. Amelia would sometimes stop in front of Clara's old room, the door always slightly ajar, as if inviting her in. But she never crossed the threshold, afraid of what she might find. One evening, unable to resist the pull any longer, Amelia pushed open the door to Clara's room. The air inside was thick with dust, and the fading light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the floor. The room was frozen in time, untouched since the day Clara had left it. A small bed stood in the corner, neatly made with a worn quilt, and on the dresser lay a few forgotten toys. Amelia felt a pang of sadness as she looked around, imagining the life that had once filled this space with warmth and laughter. As she stepped further into the room, Amelia's eyes were drawn to a small chest at the foot of the bed. It was old and battered, the wood worn smooth by years of use. She knelt down and opened it, her breath catching in her throat as she saw what lay inside. The chest was filled with Clara's belongings, dresses, shoes, a few books, and a small, well-worn doll. Amelia picked up the doll, its button eyes staring back at her, and felt a rush of emotion. This had been Clara's world, a world that had been abruptly taken from her. Amelia spent hours in Clara's room, going through the chest and learning more about the little girl who had once lived there. Each item she touched seemed to tell a story, revealing glimpses of Clara's life. There was a book of fairy tales, its pages dog-eared from countless readings, and a drawing of a family. Mr. Alden, Clara, and a woman who must have been her mother. Amelia traced the lines of the drawing with her fingers, her heart heavy with the knowledge of all that had been lost. The more Amelia uncovered, the more she realized how much Clara had meant to Mr. Alden. He had poured all his love into his daughter, and her loss had left a void that could never be filled. Amelia understood now why he had brought her to the mansion. She was a reminder of what he had lost, but also a chance for him to heal. The thought filled her with both sorrow and hope. She wanted to be there for him, to help him find peace, just as he had unknowingly given her a place where she could begin to heal. But as much as Amelia wanted to help Mr. Alden, she knew that she could not erase the past. The mansion would always be a place of ghosts, haunted by the memories of those who had lived and loved there. Amelia felt the weight of these memories pressing down on her, reminding her that her journey was far from over. There were still secrets buried within these walls, secrets that she needed to uncover if she was ever to truly understand the man who had taken her in. The echoes of the past were everywhere, in the creak of the floorboards, in the flicker of candlelight, and in the sorrowful eyes of Mr. Alden. Amelia knew that she was not alone in this house, that the ghosts of the past were watching her, guiding her steps. She could feel their presence, a constant reminder that the mansion held more than just memories. It held the key to understanding her own place in this world. And so, with a mixture of fear and determination, Amelia continued to explore, seeking answers to the questions that had begun to consume her. Just as Amelia began to find a fragile sense of security in her new life, the peace she had started to build was shattered by an unexpected visitor. One cold afternoon, a loud knock echoed through the mansion's halls, startling Amelia from her thoughts. She hurried to the entrance hall, her heart pounding with a sense of foreboding. When the door creaked open, she was met with a sight that filled her with dread. Her stepmother, standing on the threshold, her face twisted with a cruel smile. Amelia's blood ran cold as she watched her stepmother stride into the mansion as if she owned it. The woman's presence was like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over the fragile happiness Amelia had begun to feel. Without so much as a greeting, her stepmother demanded to see Mr. Alden. The cold, calculating glint in her eyes told Amelia that this visit was not a friendly one. She knew her stepmother too well. There was always a hidden agenda, always a price to be paid for her attention. Mr. Alden appeared moments later, his expression darkening when he saw the woman standing in his foyer. Amelia could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as he greeted her. There was no warmth in his voice, only the cold civility of a man who knew he was dealing with an adversary. Amelia stood back, her heart in her throat, as she watched the two adults engage in a battle of wills. She could sense the danger in the air, a threat that loomed over the fragile peace she had found. The conversation between Mr. Alden and Amelia's stepmother was terse, filled with thinly veiled threats and accusations. Her stepmother spoke of debts unpaid, of promises broken, and finally, of the agreement that had brought Amelia to the mansion. Amelia's heart sank as she listened, realizing that her stepmother had come to extort more money from Mr. Alden. The threat was clear. If he didn't pay, she would spread rumors that could ruin his reputation, tarnishing the name he had worked so hard to protect. Fear gripped Amelia as she watched the scene unfold. She had begun to feel safe with Mr. Alden, had started to believe that she had found a place where she could belong. But now, that security was being ripped away by the woman who had sold her in the first place. Amelia's mind raced with the possibilities. What if Mr. Alden refused to pay? Would she be sent back to live with her stepmother? Back to a life of neglect and cruelty? The thought was unbearable, and she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Mr. Alden's response was calm, but Amelia could see the storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. He offered her stepmother a sum of money, more than fair for what she was asking, but she refused, her demands escalating with each passing moment. The tension in the room was palpable, and Amelia could feel the walls closing in around her. She wanted to scream, to beg her stepmother to leave them alone, but the words stuck in her throat, her fear rendering her mute. As the confrontation continued, Amelia's stepmother's true nature was revealed in all its ugliness. She cared nothing for Amelia, only for the money she could squeeze out of Mr. Alden. The love and warmth Amelia had begun to feel in the mansion were being threatened by the greed and malice of the woman who had brought her into this world. Amelia felt a deep sense of betrayal, not only by her stepmother but by the circumstances that had led her to this point. She had hoped for a new beginning, but now it seemed that her past would not let her go. In the midst of the heated exchange, Amelia caught Mr. Alden's eye. There was a moment of understanding between them, a silent communication that passed without words. She saw the pain in his eyes, the conflict he was wrestling with, how to protect her while also facing the ghosts of his own past. Mr. Alden was not just fighting for Amelia. He was fighting against the darkness that had consumed his life since Clara's death. Amelia realized that she was not the only one who needed saving. The confrontation reached a breaking point when Mr. Alden, his patience worn thin, made a final offer. He promised to pay her stepmother, but only on the condition that she would leave them both alone forever. The sum was substantial, more than enough to satisfy even the greediest of hearts. Amelia's stepmother hesitated, weighing her options, before finally agreeing with a sneer. She took the money and left, but not before casting one last, venomous look at Amelia, a reminder that the past was never truly gone. With her stepmother's departure, the mansion fell into a heavy silence. Mr. Alden turned to Amelia, his face drawn with exhaustion and sorrow. Amelia could see the toll the confrontation had taken on him, the way it had dredged up old wounds that had never fully healed. She felt a wave of guilt and sadness, knowing that she was the cause of his pain, even if it was unintentional. But there was also a sense of relief. Relief that, at least for now, they were safe from the woman who had tried to destroy their fragile peace. Amelia and Mr. Alden sat together in the drawing room, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. The ordeal had left them both drained, but there was also a sense of something new between them, a bond forged in the crucible of shared struggle. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two souls who had faced down a storm together and emerged on the other side, battered but unbroken. Amelia felt closer to Mr. Alden than ever before, and for the first time, she truly believed that this place could be her home. Yet, even as she found comfort in their growing bond, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered in the back of her mind. The confrontation had revealed just how fragile their peace was, how easily it could be shattered by the ghosts of the past. Amelia knew that her stepmother's departure didn't mean the end of their troubles. There were still shadows lurking in the corners of the mansion, secrets that had yet to be uncovered. And deep down, she feared that the worst was yet to come. The tension from the confrontation with Amelia's stepmother lingered in the air, casting a shadow over the mansion. Mr. Alden, though relieved that the immediate threat had passed, was visibly troubled. He knew that paying her off was only a temporary solution. Amelia sensed his unease, and it mirrored her own fears. She knew that this moment was a turning point, that something had to change if they were to move forward. The question was, what could they do to protect the fragile bond they had begun to build? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mr. Alden made a decision. He approached Amelia, his expression serious but determined. "We need to end this," he said quietly, his voice steady. Amelia looked up at him, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. She knew what he meant. They had to confront her stepmother, face her head-on, and put an end to the threat she posed. It was a dangerous plan, but Amelia also knew it was necessary. They could no longer live under the shadow of fear. Mr. Alden insisted that Amelia accompany him, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant. He believed that it was important for her to face the woman who had caused her so much pain, to reclaim the power that had been taken from her. Amelia was terrified, but she also felt a spark of courage ignite within her. She had spent too long being afraid, too long allowing others to dictate her fate. Now, she had a chance to change that, to stand up for herself and for the life she wanted to build with Mr. Alden. The journey to confront her stepmother was fraught with tension. The road was long, and the silence between them was heavy with unspoken fears. Amelia's mind raced with possibilities. What if they failed? What if her stepmother refused to let go? But every time doubt crept in, she reminded herself of how far she had come, of the strength she had found within herself. Mr. Alden's presence beside her was a constant source of reassurance. He was no longer just her guardian. He was her ally, her partner in this battle. When they arrived at her stepmother's house, Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. The place was as cold and unwelcoming as she remembered, a reflection of the woman who lived there. Mr. Alden knocked on the door, his expression unreadable, and Amelia stood beside him, her heart pounding in her chest. When her stepmother opened the door, the cruel smile on her face told Amelia everything she needed to know. This woman had not changed. She was still the same manipulative, heartless person who had sold her without a second thought. The confrontation was tense from the start. Mr. Alden wasted no time, laying out his terms in a calm but firm voice. He offered her stepmother a final payment, one that would ensure she left them alone for good. Amelia watched as her stepmother's expression shifted, the greed in her eyes battling with the realization that this might be her last chance to extort money from Mr. Alden. The tension in the room was palpable, and Amelia's heart raced as she waited for the woman's response. Then, something unexpected happened. Amelia, driven by a surge of courage she didn't know she had, stepped forward. She looked her stepmother in the eye, her voice steady despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "You don't control me anymore," she said, her words ringing out with a strength that surprised even herself. "I'm not afraid of you." Her stepmother's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, the power dynamic shifted. Amelia was no longer the frightened little girl she had once been. She was stronger now, and she refused to be a victim any longer. Mr. Alden, inspired by Amelia's bravery, reinforced his ultimatum. He made it clear that this was the final offer, and that any further attempts to disrupt their lives would not be tolerated. The steely resolve in his voice left no room for negotiation. Her stepmother, realizing that she had lost the upper hand, grudgingly accepted the terms. But Amelia could see the anger and resentment simmering beneath the surface, a reminder that this victory had come at a cost. Still, it was a victory, and one that she and Mr. Alden had won together. As they left her stepmother's house, Amelia felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, and a newfound sense of empowerment. She had faced her fears head-on, and in doing so, had taken control of her own destiny. The bond between her and Mr. Alden had only grown stronger through this ordeal. They had stood together against a common enemy, and in the process, had forged a connection that was deeper than ever before. Amelia knew that they had crossed a threshold, one from which there was no turning back. The ride back to the mansion was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence, one filled with a sense of accomplishment and peace. Amelia leaned her head against the window, watching the landscape pass by, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She glanced over at Mr. Alden, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. For the first time, she saw a hint of a smile on his lips, a small but significant sign that the weight on his shoulders had begun to lift. They had faced their demons together, and they had emerged victorious. When they returned to the mansion, Amelia felt a sense of homecoming that she had never experienced before. The house, once a place of shadows and secrets, now felt warm and welcoming. She and Mr. Alden sat together by the fire, the flickering flames casting a soft glow over the room. They didn't need to speak. Their shared experience had said it all. They had found something in each other that neither of them had expected: family, trust, and the promise of a future free from the ghosts of the past. The morning after their confrontation with Amelia's stepmother brought a sense of renewal to the mansion. For the first time in what felt like forever, the oppressive gloom that had hung over the house seemed to lift. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting warm, golden rays across the marble floors. Amelia stood by the window in her room, watching as the first light of day bathed the gardens in a soft, amber glow. It was a sight that filled her with a quiet hope, a promise of better days to come. Mr. Alden was up early, his usual somber demeanor replaced by a calm determination. The events of the previous day had left him with a renewed sense of purpose. He no longer moved through the mansion like a man haunted by the past. Instead, there was a lightness in his step, a resolve to rebuild what had been lost. Amelia watched him from a distance, her heart swelling with a mixture of admiration and affection. She had always seen the pain in his eyes, but now, for the first time, she glimpsed something else, a spark of hope. The mansion itself seemed to come alive in response to the change in its inhabitants. The cold, echoing halls were filled with warmth and light, and the air no longer felt thick with the weight of unspoken sorrows. Amelia and Mr. Alden began to make small changes around the house, breathing new life into the once neglected rooms. They opened the curtains, letting in the sunshine that had long been kept at bay. They dusted off old furniture, rearranged the rooms, and brought in fresh flowers from the garden. Each small act of renewal felt like a step toward healing. As the days turned into weeks, Amelia found herself settling into a new routine. She began attending the local school, where she quickly made friends with the other children. It was a new experience for her, being around other children her age, laughing, playing, and learning together. The school was small, but it was filled with warmth and kindness, qualities that had been sorely lacking in her life before. Amelia's heart slowly began to heal as she embraced this new chapter of her life, one filled with the simple joys of childhood. Mr. Alden, too, found solace in the changes that were taking place. He spent more time outdoors, tending to the garden that had once been his wife's pride and joy. Amelia often joined him, and together they planted new flowers, their bright colors a stark contrast to the dark memories that had once haunted the mansion. The garden became a place of peace and reflection, a living testament to the healing power of love and care. As they worked side by side, the bond between them grew stronger, a bond forged in shared loss and newfound hope. The mansion, once a place of sadness, began to fill with laughter and joy. Amelia and Mr. Alden shared meals together, their conversations light and filled with warmth. They spoke of the future, of the plans they had for the mansion and the garden, of the life they were building together. Amelia's heart swelled with a sense of belonging, a feeling she had never truly known before. She had found a home, not just in the mansion, but in the companionship of the man who had once been a stranger to her. Yet, even as they moved forward, the memories of the past were never far away. Mr. Alden often spoke of Clara, his voice filled with a quiet sadness that time could not erase. But now, instead of dwelling on the pain of her loss, he remembered the joy she had brought into his life. Amelia listened with empathy, understanding that the past would always be a part of them, but it no longer had to define their future. They honored Clara's memory by living fully in the present, finding happiness in the small moments they shared. As the seasons changed, so did the mansion. The once overgrown gardens flourished under Mr. Alden's and Amelia's care, bursting with vibrant colors and fragrant blooms. The rooms that had once felt empty and cold were now filled with life. Books lined the shelves, paintings adorned the walls, and the sound of music often drifted through the halls. It was as if the mansion itself was breathing again, each day a step further away from the darkness that had once enveloped it. Amelia's relationship with Mr. Alden deepened into something akin to a father-daughter bond. He was no longer just the man who had taken her in. He was her family, the person who had given her a second chance at life. Amelia's heart swelled with gratitude and love, feelings that she had thought were lost to her forever. She found herself looking forward to each new day, eager to see what the future held for them both. The pain of the past had not disappeared, but it had softened, making room for the joy of the present. One morning, as they walked through the garden, Mr. Alden paused and looked at Amelia with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice gentle, "about making things official. I'd like to adopt you, Amelia, if that's something you'd want." Amelia's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding with a mix of emotions: joy, gratitude, and a profound sense of belonging. She had always dreamed of having a real family, and now that dream was within reach. With tears in her eyes, she nodded, unable to find the words to express how much it meant to her. The decision to adopt Amelia marked a new beginning for them both. It was a step that solidified the bond they had built, a promise that they would face the future together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The mansion, which had once been a place of sorrow, was now a home in the truest sense of the word. A place filled with love, laughter, and the promise of brighter days to come. Amelia knew that she had finally found her place in the world, and she was ready to embrace it with all her heart. As the days turned into months, the bond between Amelia and Mr. Alden deepened into something more profound than either of them had ever expected. The mansion, once a place of shadows and sorrow, had transformed into a sanctuary of love and healing. Amelia, who had arrived with nothing but fear and uncertainty, now felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. The dark memories of the past had not been erased, but they had been softened, reshaped by the love that had grown between her and Mr. Alden. Amelia often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She remembered the stormy night when she had been taken from her home, the fear that had gripped her heart as she faced an uncertain future. But now, looking back, she realized that everything she had endured had led her to this moment. The pain, the loss, the fear, they had all been part of a journey that had transformed her into the person she was today. And at the heart of that transformation was love, the love that had blossomed between her and Mr. Alden. Mr. Alden, too, had undergone a transformation. The man who had once been consumed by grief and guilt had found a new purpose in caring for Amelia. She had brought light back into his life, helping him to see that love could exist even in the darkest of times. The memories of his daughter, Clara, no longer haunted him. Instead, they were a source of comfort, a reminder of the love he had once known and had found again in Amelia. He no longer saw her as a replacement for Clara, but as her own person, someone he could love unconditionally. The transformation of their relationship was mirrored in the mansion itself. The once neglected and decaying house had been restored to its former glory, each room filled with warmth and life. The gardens, once overgrown and wild, now flourished under their care, a testament to the love and effort they had put into creating something beautiful out of the ruins of the past. Amelia often marveled at how much had changed, how a place that had once felt like a prison had become a true home. Amelia and Mr. Alden found joy in the simple pleasures of life. They spent their days tending to the garden, reading together by the fire, and exploring the nearby woods. Amelia had discovered a love for painting, and she often spent hours capturing the beauty of the mansion and its surroundings on canvas. Mr. Alden, who had once shied away from anything that reminded him of the past, now encouraged her creativity, seeing in her art a reflection of the hope and renewal that had come into their lives. But even as they embraced their new life, they never forgot the journey that had brought them here. Amelia often thought about her father, the man who had loved her so dearly and whose loss had brought her so much pain. She knew that he would have been proud of the person she had become, proud of the strength she had found within herself. She also thought of Clara, the little girl whose memory had played such a pivotal role in her own transformation. Amelia felt a deep connection to Clara, not as a replacement, but as a kindred spirit. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Amelia turned to Mr. Alden with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Clara would have liked me?" she asked softly, her voice filled with a quiet vulnerability. Mr. Alden looked at her, his eyes filled with love and understanding. "I think she would have loved you," he replied, his voice gentle, "just as I do." Amelia felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of acceptance and belonging that went beyond words. In that moment, She knew that the love they shared was something truly special. The transformation of love was not just about healing from the past. It was about creating a future together. Amelia and Mr. Alden began to make plans for the years ahead, dreaming of all the things they would do together. They talked about expanding the garden, traveling to see the world beyond the mansion, and perhaps even opening their home to others who needed a place of refuge and healing. The possibilities seemed endless, and for the first time in her life, Amelia felt excited about the future. As they moved forward, Amelia and Mr. Alden knew that there would still be challenges to face. The scars of the past would always be there, but they had learned that love had the power to transform even the deepest wounds into something beautiful. They had discovered that home was not just a place, but a feeling, a sense of belonging that came from being with the people who truly cared about you. And in each other, they had found a home that could never be taken away. The transformation of love had given them both a second chance at happiness, a chance to build a life that was rich with meaning and filled with joy. Amelia knew that she would always carry the memory of her father with her, just as Mr. Alden would always remember Clara. But now, those memories were not burdens. They were gifts, reminders of the love that had shaped them into the people they were today. Amelia felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey she had been on, and for the love that had brought her to this moment. As the sun set over the mansion, casting a golden glow over the garden, Amelia and Mr. Alden stood side by side, looking out at the world they had created together. The future stretched out before them, filled with endless possibilities. And as they held hands, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with the love that had transformed their lives and given them a second chance at happiness. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to continue this journey with us. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and join us for more stories that explore the power of love, transformation, and the strength we find in each other. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Your reflections are always welcome. And if you'd like to support our work and help bring more stories to life, consider contributing through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pinned comment. Together, we can continue to share stories that inspire and uplift.